I'd like to thank Patricia for inviting me here because I'm not a researcher, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a mathematician, I'm not a statistician, I'm a recovering journalist actually, who's now Director of Corporate Communications for Genome Alberta. I had the direct consumer test done by 23andMe, Decode, Navigenics, and the DNA Ancestry Project. It was quite an interesting experience, and people always ask me why. Well, first, because I come from journalism into this industry or the science, it was a good way for me to learn about it. Right? What a better way than to actually have the test done and try and understand what it's all about. It gave me an outreach tool to talk to the public, and I use that actually quite extensively. And it's not just a PR game or a PR exercise. It's an actual chance to say, here's what it looks like. Here's a spreadsheet 1,000,000 lines long, and that's just a partial sequence. Here's what we can talk about, and here's some certain risk information, and here's what it's all about. And I also did it because I could. The information's out there. You can do it. And as I say, as a recovering journalist, the question was, why do people do this, and what can I learn from it? And it's there, so let's try it. I actually sat down with a couple of people from the GELS team, which is our kind of the bioethics societal issues, that part of the organization. I said, what do I need to think about? So we came to the conclusion that I have no kids, so I don't have to worry about this being passed on, the information being passed on, or the implication for kids. My sister's adopted, so if I come up with something, there's no siblings really to worry about. My parents are well into their 80s. Dad is 86 and still works for WestJet. So look in the cockpit when you're flying home. If you see an 86-year-old guy, look out. No, he's not actually a pilot anymore, but he still works full-time for them. And interestingly enough, my test said that I am predisposed to living to be 100. Dad's 86, still working. My grandmother was 101 when she finally died. So, you know, maybe I've got I don't know, maybe I've got the genes to pull this off. There are lots of consent forms to sign. So I had thought through all this. I'd sat down with the GELS team. I applied all the rigor that I could, both from, I guess, from the organizational science side that I was involved in, but also as a journalist. It's what I did when I was a journalist. You know, you look at these things. So I really looked at them closely, especially the part in the consent form that says, in big letters, you will find out things you might not want to know. And because I'd gone through, okay, I have no kids, and my sister's adopted, all that kind of stuff, okay, I'll take my chances. And after looking at the consent form and the subsequent results, there were no surprises, because these are fairly dense forms. I mean, you can see they give you a lot of stuff to go through. Was there a risk? Well, I have a ranch, I have bulls, and there is more risk for me going out in the middle of that pasture, those bulls, as you can see what they've done to the fence, than there is for me posting my genome on the web and having the exercise done. Because there's risks to everything we do. Getting a credit card. You want to leave your data open for public exposure? Get a credit card. Click on a bad web link. Have it invade your computer. That's far more dangerous than anything I've posted on the web. Investing your money these days, there's a big risk there. And I say, going for a walk in my pasture, you know, I got a couple of ornery little bulls there, and we've got a cougar on the property that occasionally kills some of the animals. So there's a lot of risk just for going out. Why did I take it? And why do other people take it? It's my genome. So why not take the risk? It's mine. I can do what I want with it. And that is a pervasive attitude you'll find with people online. Jen McCabe is somebody that I met at a biotechnology conference in Atlanta. And Jan is a patient care advocate. She works out of the US, but travels the world talking about what patients should be doing, access to the healthcare records, things like that. And she calls it her myome. And she means that in very strong terms. It's mine, it's my myome. Don't you screw with it, and you let me do what I want with it. Jen is also bipolar and ADD. And watching her speak is a real experience because she also is real active on Twitter. She tends to speak in 140 characters. It's a really weird experience. But she shares everything, and she's really big on electronic healthcare records. And she really kind of influenced me in terms of why do people take the risk. So I'm really active in the online community. I have a Twitter account. We have a Facebook application that Genome Alberta developed called Genomics. If you're on Facebook, you should check it out. It's a sharing site for news. It's actually not a site for sharing genome data, but it shares news. Plus it has links for downloading genomic data from other people. On 23andMe, you have like a Facebook kind of experience where you can share your data with other people. So I have at least 30 people right now who share their data with me, and because my information's been posted on the web, I also have stalkers who think they're related to me. In fact, I just got a note the other day from somebody who said, I've gone through your genome, I've looked at it, I've found some mitochondrial DNA in a few locations, I think we're third cousins. And she gave me basically her family history and a whole bunch of names and surnames from her family and said, do any of these look familiar? I don't know, I'm not into genealogy. And I had to reply to her quite honestly, no, I really haven't done much of a family history, nothing there looks familiar. But there's at least half a dozen people who are kind of tracking me on the ancestry side, trying to figure out if we're related. And I have a whole lot more requests lined up. And I at least take the time to look at the requests and figure out who these people are before I say yes, but I have yet to say no to anybody. And people online, what they're doing with the data is more than just playing with ancestry. They're taking action with it. Jen, for instance, when she got her 23andMe data, she set up a video camera behind her, and when she opened her online file, she videotaped herself looking at this. And so you get her kind of live for 20 minutes on a podcast that she posted on her site, going through the data. And one of the things she comes across in it is a high risk for celiac disease. And you hear her say on the tape, oh, celiac disease. I'm going to make an appointment with my doctor. And she does. She makes an appointment with her doctor. And she's also looking for a celiac support group. Jen doesn't have celiac disease, or at least she hasn't been diagnosed with it. But that's what she's doing with the data, and that's what people are doing with the data. So I asked online, I just asked a bunch of people, just in general, why do you do this? What do you think the risks are? And here are some of the replies I got. You can look at them fairly quickly, but with the exception of, I think probably out of the 30 or so that I've got so far, because I only started doing this a couple of weeks ago in terms of asking them for the information, I've only got 2 people that said they're worried. But even that worry must be tempered because they've posted their information on 23andMe and I can find it and look at it and we share our data. So their worries are limited. Now the spelling in these is exactly the way I got the material. Draw what you want from that, but these are the people that are using these tests, that are paying their money and taking actions. And in some cases running out and doing a lot of weird things. On Facebook there's the BRCA1 support group. And there's a lot of young women on there who are testing positive for the BRCA gene and going out and asking their doctor for vasectomy based on their test and their family history. I don't know what the doctor's reaction is in the US. I can imagine what it would be up here, but it's largely a US group. And a lot of them are then posting a few days later, I've had my vasectomy. So people are actually acting on a lot of this data. Now here's somebody who says, plus I'm a private person, I don't think it is anyone else's business. Well, I have access to her genome, so I don't. It's a mystery to me sometimes what really their thought process is, but I guess maybe within the 23andMe environment, they feel fairly, I don't know, safe because they're fellow people like them. This guy, he actually sent me a direct message. He didn't post it in the public part of the forum. He said, you assume wrongly that we're afraid. Because I had asked the question, what are your fears? And obviously his reply was, you assume wrongly that we're afraid. A lot of people are like me. They look at it and say, well, what can anybody do with it? And I'll get to some of the slides later in terms of what my results say. But what can you really do with it? I mean, I've heard a lot over the course of the day about how you can, in fact, de-identify the data and the process you have to go through. Well, as a journalist, that's the kind of exercise we used to do a long time ago by hand. Electronic health records. I mean, I think long before electronic health records are out there and put online, we were doing a lot of stories when we found health records in dumpsters and recycling bins and garbage cans. So the danger has always been there. And what did it really tell me? It says I'm going to be bald in an early age. Do with that what you want. But it said I'd be bald before I was 40, and then it went on to say there was an increased risk by the time I'm 60. Well, I've beat the 40, 60, I'm still crossing my fingers I'll make that one and not be bald. It says I have a low risk of developing asthma. I've been an asthmatic my entire life. My mother smoked when she was pregnant, and when I was growing up, she and my dad both smoked. Does that have anything to do with it? I'm willing to bet it does, but it also means that I'm speaking to people about genetic testing. I can say, okay, these are risk factors, they mean something, but the other thing is, in one of the tests, it said I'm really low for, as I say, for the risk of asthma. It was like 9 out of 100. I often point out to them, well, somebody's got to be the 9. You know, maybe I just rolled the dice. Maybe it had nothing to do with my parents smoking or my mother smoking. I don't know. I'm at an increased risk for osteoarthritis. That one actually is proving to be true. But then I played football and hockey when I was in school, and I beat up my knees a long time ago, but I live on Advil, so that one's actually coming true. It says I have sticky earwax, proved to be true. It also said I'd have brown eyes, which proved to be true. It says I'd have brown hair. It's getting a little gray, but it was true. There's a good chance I'll live to be 100. Well, that'll be interesting. You know, it runs in the family. Mom or grandma was 101. Dad's 86, still working. It says I'm at increased risk for age-related macular degeneration. So I went out and had an extra eye test. I made a point of having my eyes tested because I, like most people, let that thing slide. And it says I have an increased risk for early onset Alzheimer's, which is really pleasing to know if I'm going to live to be 101. You know, I've kind of already warned my girlfriend we could have a problem here. You know, we better start planning. And I do it tongue-in-cheek, but when people get this information, when you talk about what the psychological risks are, if you don't have the research community involved in this process, which they are not, all these activities are going online, all the discussion is happening, and there are no scientists, there's no doctors, there's no genetic counselors involved, and they get something like that, what do you think they're going to do? I mean, the reaction in some ways is inevitable, and unless the research and medical and science community is involved in these discussions, this is exactly the way it's going to carry on. And if information alone could change people's lives, everybody would be skinny, rich, and happy. So just because I have this information doesn't mean I can use it or do anything with it or will react to it. Let's face it, we all know that smoking kills and you've got to wear your seatbelt in the car. But, you know, how often do we see people that practically go through the windshield of their car with a cigarette butt in their hand? People don't learn. So I have a background as a journalist. I work for a genomics organization, so I'm one of the lucky ones. I have people to turn to. But the public don't have that. They didn't ask for the Human Genome Project or for the technology to sequence their genome. The public wasn't rising up saying, we want this and we want it now. Science did that. And once science did that, there's an obligation, I think, to then give back to the people. Well, we gave you this data, we gave you this information, now we're going to help you interpret it. But I come back to the science, the research, and the medical community are noticeably lacking from these online forums. Science let the genie out of the bottle. It wasn't the public, it wasn't the media. And yet, I go to these conferences all the time, and I'm generally hearing scientists say, oh, the media, look what they've done. They've blown things right out of proportion. So, with that in mind, I'll play this for you, which was not done by the media, which was not done by PR firms, or well, I guess it was done by a PR firm, and was not done by the companies who are selling the direct-to-consumer testing.
We're not rock stars.
Or movie stars. We're just scientists.
Scientists in white coats and nerdy sweaters.
So why would you care what we have to say? Because right now there's a way to disease.
Regenerate organs, prevent heart attacks,
Let bodies heal themselves. Defeat diabetes.
Parkinson's, MS, and more.
Become less dependent on drugs.
Stop wars and car crashes from crippling us.
Make growing old truly graceful.
And provide unprecedented hope for humanity.
It's called a stem cell.
Small cell.
And it can do all that.
Not in 100 years or 50.
But in 10.
We're the scientists doing the research every day.
And we can tell you that right now we're on the brink of incredible, breathtaking things. Remarkable, stranger.
And more beautiful than fiction things.
But this isn't just about time.
It's about people. It's about people.
People we love.
People you love. People who could get better.
People who could get better and be baby and disability throughout their lifetime.
So if we can do it right here,
Right now. Why?
Now, when the scientists put out something like that, it's linked all over the web. It's on YouTube. In fact, when I searched for it to see if I could steal a copy for this presentation, I found tons of references that never actually took me to the stem cell charter website. They went all over the place. So once science makes this offer, it says, look what we can do. Worse yet, we can have wars and car crashes and they're not going to hurt as much. I mean, again, the reaction is inevitable. But science and the medical research community and whatnot They left it to the individual to sort it out, right? And I go to these conferences and I see people say, no, there's no clinical validity to this. Well, what about that video if there's no clinical validity to it? And you put this information out there and then leave it to the people to sort it out. You leave it to the individual to sort out their Meome. They get these reports from 23andMe and Navigenics and whatnot, and they have to sort it out themselves. Now, in the case of Navigenics, they do offer you a genetic counselor. And I had mine done through the MedCan clinic in Toronto, and you actually get an appointment with a genetic counselor to start things off before you even sign up. So they kind of explain the risks, and you got a real person. A real person, however, who's in a nice white lab coat in the clinic, and you get the sense that this is a medical test. Even though they never make any promises, you get a very different sense than when you sign up for this thing online and just spit into a cup and put it in the mail. So people turn to each other online to get the information, because there is, I come back to again, there is nobody involved in these online discussions who knows better. My data has been downloaded hundreds of times from our website. I was at a conference in Washington put on by our GELS team on science communications. And because I'm an ex-journalist, I went to the press club that same week because there was a session on genetics, and it was mostly for the media to explain how genetic testing works. And I had a question, so I stood up and I asked Hank Greeley a question. I asked Mike Spear from Genome Alberta asked my question. The session ended, and this guy comes running over with his laptop and says, I have your genome on my laptop. What a coincidence. And he opened it up and he said, we've been doing some analysis for rheumatoid arthritis, which I was already at fairly high risk for. And he said, we've got some new SNPs. We reran your analysis, because you can download my raw data file, not just my summary. He said, we reran the analysis. You might want to take a look at it because you're even higher risk than your results actually indicate. Cool. And then somebody from the National Institute of Health came over and said, we've been giving away the virtual genes off Facebook, because as part of our Facebook application, you can give virtual genes. So you can give away the gene for blue eyes and red hair and things like that. And NIH had been using it. So people are very active in this stuff. How many people have heard of SNPedia? 1, 2. Okay, you're all involved in genetic research. You're all involved in the ethical side, the policy side. You should know what SNPedia is. Why should you know? Because it's a third-party database, not run by a research group or an institution or a university. It's some genetic geeks. And it's like Wikipedia in that people upload SNP data. Now, it has to have I think it's two peer-reviewed citations to be accepted into it. It's not just a question of like the other Wikipedia things where you can just upload the stuff and it's done. Anyway, they also have a piece of software called Promethease. So what you do is you take your raw data that you got from the direct-to-consumer genetic testing companies, you plug your raw data into Promethease, it runs it against SNPedia, and you get a whole new analysis. I have a spreadsheet, again, a million lines long, based on SNPedia. It doesn't disagree with what comes from the other companies, but it includes a lot of pretty esoteric data in there, because two peer-reviewed citations, that's it, that's all it takes, and it gets in there. But the point being, there is a very active community playing with this stuff. I mean, there's garage hackers playing with this stuff. When I did this slide, I had 25 people on 23andMe who were sharing. Once I put my note out there saying I'm looking for some more information for my presentation, I'm now well over that. The request kept coming in. Okay, let's share, let's share. And what the 23andMe sharing does is it takes your information and you can either directly compare it one-on-one, or you can take everybody who shares with you, and it does this big graph and shows where you're all similar and where you're all different. I have people like that are 76% similarity to me. But it gives you the option to do that. And I've already told you the story about the laptop in Washington. So what does the online community do with the information other than sharing it? Okay, the slides I showed you were what people think about the privacy side. Here's what they're actually doing with it and what they're going out and doing with it. They are acting on it. And this is not it's not a question of will they act on it, what may happen. I did a co-authored a piece with Shane Green from OGI for the American Medical Association's virtual mentor, online journal. And Shane went into the piece saying, we should do an op-ed piece on what people might do with it. And when I started showing him stuff like that, he was actually kind of blown away. He said, "You mean they're already doing it?" I said, "Yeah," because he was hoping he was going to do a piece on what the possibilities were. So each one of these are separate entries that came to me. And again, there was more than I could possibly use because they didn't stop. And say in my case, the only real behavior change I've done is I'll get my eyes tested more often. This guy, please check what the variant of the HF gene you have. He'd gone to my genome first and maybe suggested there's something I should check. All these slides are actually in the book, so you can look at them later. But the point is, people are taking action. They're actually modifying their behavior, and they're doing it in larger numbers, I think, than you probably realize. They're taking them to their physicians. I know I asked my physician, because one of the things that came out of the SNPedia database first, as opposed to the other ones, was that I'm at risk if I take statins. So when I got my yearly checkup, I did say, here's what it said. I asked my doctor, I said, do you care? He said, well, I really am not a geneticist. It's a teaching hospital, actually, so at least he's kind of clued in. But he said, it's not really his thing. He said, but I'll make a note of it. We'll put it in your file. In case someday we need to give you a statin, we can at least consider the option. But as far as he is concerned, it was like a big deal, or not a big deal. Now you can see a lot of people really do think of taking them to your doctor. In the case of the Navigenics test, you actually get a physician's report as part of the test. They give you a kind of a lay summary, but they also give you a physician's report. The idea is you print it out and you can take it to your doctor. It includes citations and references and whatnot, and a kind of a different presentation of the same information so that your doctor can choose or not choose to use it. And you can see hugs and everything. I mean, it really is an involved community. If somebody comes up with something in their results that's really negative or they're worried about, there's this, just like on Facebook, there's this outpouring of, oh, poor you, let us know what's going to happen. And they go through it in great detail. Now, I believe this is another BRCA one. I'm not sure. How do people choose who are going to trust? Well, I think they would trust the research community if they were involved. I know they would. In fact, there's been a lot of PR surveys done strictly from the public relations side of things, and people trust scientists. They trust researchers, but they're not there, right? So they turn to each other's. So that is a really lightning trip through my Meome, and I'm open to questions. Yeah.
So you mentioned people are changing their lifestyles, but are there, what's your impression of unnecessary procedures done due to this? So I believe there may be lots of waste due to such tests. Like you said, you are low risk for asthma or whatever. So it's not, it looks like it's not so much accurate at this point.
Yeah, it's what other actions are people taking, and is that really the basis of your question? Like, how are they going into detailed?
What are the other actions people are
What are the other
taking?
actions people are taking?
Do you think this is caused waste and unnecessary tests?
Oh, unnecessary test. Yeah, I can almost guarantee it. Jen McCabe, now granted she's in the US, it's a slightly different healthcare system, but I can guarantee it. I mean, she went and she said she was going to make an appointment with her doctor, and knowing Jen, she probably demanded that she have some tests done. The MedCan clinic in Toronto that does the test, it's a clinic. So they do it's a Navigenics test, but it's done through the clinic. So they do the swab in the clinic, they do the consultation with you, and then they send it off to Navigenics. Navigenics sends back the results, and you sit down with a genetic counselor. But it's a clinic. And even though they won't come right out and say it, but suppose it was me and I was there and I was doing it kind of like an ordinary person, and it was high risk for age-related macular degeneration, and I said, gee, how do I test it? Just step this way, Mike, let's go down the hall, sit you down, because it's a team of, like, they got 20 doctors there, it's a huge clinic, sit you down and they'll do the test. And they were upfront with that with me. They said, yeah, we'll do all the tests necessary if you ask for them. Now, because she's a genetic counselor, they're very careful about how they handle it. They're not going to say you should have this test done, but they will do them. So my guess is there's lots of unnecessary testing going on, and as these become more prevalent, there's going to be more. Yeah. Yep.
You mentioned that you had your genome looked at by a number of different directors.
Yep.
Were the results consistent throughout, or
Were the results the same or at least similar between the companies? Now, in the case of the DNA Ancestry Project, it is strictly ancestry testing, and all those were exact. Some of the risk factors were slightly different between the companies, but I'm not a geneticist, so I can't drill through like 600,000 lines to go all the way down. But on the surface, at least, on the parts that I can interpret and I have been able to sit down with, there is no statistically significant difference between the companies in terms of risk factors. There are some variations, but they're more or less the same. So in the case of the baldness thing, for instance, there's only one of the 3 companies that actually tests for that, because I would love to see what it actually means to the other 2 companies if they came up with the same result. But all 3 companies add information to their database and send you regular notes saying we've added this, we've added this. And even though Snapedi was the first to come up with a statin result, all 3 now have come up with a statin, the same risk factor, and it's more or less the same between the 3. So they're pretty consistent. Now, I have seen some examples online where people say it's quite different.
So in your presentation, you were talking about or asking or saying that the researchers aren't there when these people are talking to each other. And so I just had a couple of thoughts. One is people are always going to talk to each other, right? They don't always want somebody, the expert, to join in and say, I know better, right? So that there will always be that. And the other thing is, when you showed the video of the stem cell, do you think that was a good example of the researchers joining into a public conversation, or?
Okay, was it a good example of researchers joining in? I guess I think it was, in my personal opinion, it was hugely overhyped. I think it was unnecessary, and I think it was meant to sway people. So is that a good example? No, I don't think it's a good example, but they certainly entered into the conversation. As for people not wanting to be told what to do, that's quite true, but it's a question of tone. It's not. People don't like it when they're being talked down to or it's being paternalistic. But if the researchers in the science community and the medical community were involved in the conversation, were part of these forums, all they simply have to say in a lot of cases is, you might want to check this journal article, or you might want to look at that, and provide references that aren't actually in a journal where you got to spend $100 to get the one article. Actually point to something that people can use and read and understand. So it's a question of tone, because you're right. People don't like to be told what to do, but it's not a question of telling people what to do. It's more a question of, I guess, awareness and education and saying, that's a good point, but we've also found this. And I can see I'm getting the hook.